Chapter 1. I remember the day everything fell apart. Well, maybe not exactly. Memory plays tricks, especially when you've spent a long time trying not to think about something. But certain things stick. Smells, sounds, small details that attach themselves to your head without asking permission. I remember, for instance, that I bought too much pasta. 3 packets because they were on sale, and I even thought it was a good idea, that they'd come in handy. The shop was more crowded than usual, which for a Saturday afternoon was quite an achievement. That morning, I'd woken up with that specific feeling I'd known for some time now, that the day was mine and I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, at least for the next 2 days. Over the past few months, mornings like that had been rare. I won't get into the details because the details are mine, and they're not relevant to what came after. I'll just say that I'd been going through a rough patch and it had affected my work more than I should have allowed. But the people at the firm turned out to be surprisingly understanding, more than I'd expected, more than I probably deserved. Over the past few weeks, I'd been trying to return the favor, arriving on time, staying late, doing more than was required. I was slowly getting back on track, and that feeling of something being rebuilt was clear and good that morning. Saturday was my day with no plans, and that was good too. People moved between the aisles with that specific look on their faces I knew well from the last pandemic, focused, slightly tense, as if the simple act of buying groceries required some kind of tactical plan. The world had been strange for a while now, stranger than usual. Another pandemic, another set of bad decisions made too late or in the wrong places. People had learned that you could be careless because last time it worked out somehow. Masks were back. Hand sanitizer dispensers stood at every doorway, but no quarantines, no locking down the city. Everyone went where they wanted because this time it wasn't that bad. Not yet. At the cold remedies counter there were only the packets from the very back left, the ones people always leave till last, the ones that are dented or have a chipped corner. Someone at the produce section was talking quietly on the phone, glancing over their shoulder every few seconds. The cashier in a mask looped the same, "Hello, do you have a loyalty card?" in the tone of someone who has said that sentence 100 times and long since stopped listening to the answer. Near the end of the tinned goods aisle, I passed a man who had stopped at the shelf of jarred soups. He was wearing gloves, nitrile, the kind from a pharmacy, and a mask worn properly, not pulled down to his chin. That alone wasn't particularly unusual. With the weather and with what they were saying on television, it happened. But his trolley was half full, arranged with a kind of deliberate order that random shopping doesn't have. Tinned goods, rice, pasta, batteries. And the man himself. He was gripping a handwritten list, ticking off items one by one, no longer stopping to check prices. Quick, focused, with that slight tension in the shoulders of someone doing something urgent and knowing why. I watched for maybe 3 seconds. Then I reached for the pasta because it was on sale and moved on. I picked up what I needed. Bread, something to eat for a few days, coffee that was running low, and the pasta because of the sale. At the checkout, there was a new sticker on the floor, yellow tape reading, "Maintain your distance," and I thought it must have been a good 3 years since I'd last seen one. Outside it was calm, but something was off, and that something was hard to put into words. Maybe too many ambulances. Maybe those 2 police cars parked in front of the building across the street with no obvious reason. Maybe the way people were walking, faster than usual, more focused, less likely to be looking at their phones. Small things. Nothing that would attract attention on its own, but together it added up to something like background noise I couldn't locate. I shrugged and went home. I lived a few streets from the center. A flat typical of a man after a divorce. Some furniture, a lot of books, a vacuum cleaner bought with the intention of using it more than once a month. I unpacked the shopping, put water on for pasta, because since I'd already bought 3 packets, at least one of them could come in handy right away. The television was on in the background, some cooking program, then the news, then something loud and colorless again. The news said that infection numbers were rising in several regions. Standard announcement, standard tone. Serious, but not alarmist. Something about a new variant showing different clinical characteristics than previously observed. Something about mounting pressure on medical services and reports suggesting the virus might continue to mutate in unpredictable directions. The expert in the studio spoke calmly, with that characteristic look of someone who knows more than they're saying. I changed the channel. I ate lunch. I cleaned as much as I could bring myself to clean on a free Saturday, which meant half the kitchen and a superficial wipe of dust from the table. I sat down in front of the television with a cup of tea, and for a moment I was just a person in their flat on an ordinary Saturday, and that was pleasant. Around 5 o'clock I heard the first siren. One, then two, then several at once. I went to the window. On the street below, 2 ambulances were heading in the same direction, a police car with lights flashing behind them. The neighbor from across the way was standing at his window, looking in the same direction as me. Our eyes met through the glass. He shrugged. I shrugged. I went back to my tea. But the sirens didn't stop. For the next hour they got louder and closer, and it became harder and harder to pretend it was nothing. The television switched to a news channel, and the presenter was now speaking in a different voice than usual. That voice television people reserve for important announcements, a little slower, a little more precise. I put my tea back on the hob to reheat it, and I realized I'd done it entirely on autopilot and that my head was already operating in a different mode than 5 minutes ago. Outside, someone was speaking through a megaphone. I opened the window. Cold air came in along with the sound. A police car on the street below. The voice from the loudspeaker calm and clear in the way of someone trained to sound calm and clear in situations where no one else is. Attention, attention. A precautionary evacuation has been ordered for residents of the district. Please take essential personal belongings, documents, and medication for a maximum of 3 days and proceed to your nearest collection point. I went back to the television. News tickers were running across the full width of the screen now, stacked one above another. I heard the word mutation. I heard the word aggression. I heard the word fatalities. I turned the television off and started packing. I grabbed the backpack sitting in the wardrobe from my last trip and emptied the old stuff out onto the floor. I put in my documents, some cash, a charger, a few changes of clothes, my medications, a power bank, a torch that had been sitting on the shelf for as long as I could remember and which I had probably never actually used. One of the pasta packets sitting on the counter ended up in the bag in the general chaos. I didn't notice, didn't take it out. It just stayed there. I stood at the door with the backpack on, and it hit me that I was ready, that packing everything that mattered had taken maybe 10 minutes, and that the bag was surprisingly light. I don't know what that says about my life. Probably nothing good, probably something like how over the last few years I'd been losing things faster than I gained them. But in that specific moment, with the megaphone outside and the news tickers on the television, the lightness of the bag was something like a relief. I picked up my keys and went back. The toothbrush. It was standing in the bathroom by the sink, and if I hadn't thought of it on the landing, I wouldn't have thought of it at all, and for a moment I felt a little stupid. Because sirens, because megaphone, because aggression and fatalities on the news ticker, and I'd gone back for a toothbrush. But I went back, packed it, and left for the second time. At the bread knife, I paused for a moment, already in the corridor, thinking from memory. I left it, and for a split second felt stupid about that, then turned back again and took it and put it in the side pocket, and felt stupid about something else. On the stairwell, the neighbor from the 4th floor was standing by the lift with a suitcase and a small child she was holding by the hand so tightly the child kept trying to pull free. She looked at me with that expression I knew, half question, half confirmation that we both knew something was wrong. "Are you going too?" she asked. "I'm going," I said. I had nothing else to say, and she probably didn't either, because she stepped into the lift and the doors closed behind her. There were more people on the street than I'd expected. Not a crowd, not yet, but visibly more than at this hour on a normal Saturday. People were coming out of doorways with backpacks and bags, looking around, heading in the same direction as me or asking someone nearby where exactly the collection point was. Police officers at every corner were directing pedestrian and vehicle traffic because the streets were gridlocked in a way I hadn't seen in years. Cars sat bumper to bumper. Some people were honking, others were leaving their cars in the middle of the road and walking. The collection point was 4 streets away in the car park next to the sports hall. The closer we got, the more people there were. Families, elderly people, groups of friends who stuck together, lone people with backpacks who looked just like me. Police officers and volunteers in high-vis jackets formed something like a queue leading through several stations. At each one, someone in a hazmat suit and mask checked something on each person passing through, looked into their mouths, took their temperature, made notes. Somewhere in the middle of the queue, a man in a suit jacket, as if he'd come straight from the office or from some meeting, was standing with his phone to his ear, dialing the same number again and again. I watched him look at the screen, dial, wait, lower the phone, dial again. There was no panic on his face, something quieter and worse. The focus of someone doing one thing, and that one thing has to work. It didn't work. He pocketed his phone and stared straight ahead and stood in the queue like everyone else. The queue moved efficiently. Someone had really planned this well, or had a plan ready for exactly this occasion from long ago, and had simply never told anyone about it. When I reached the station, a woman in a hazmat suit asked for my ID, looked at me briefly, took my temperature, asked me to open my mouth. "Clear," she said. "Please go to gate number 3 and then onto the bus area." I went. A woman in a white coat was standing at the entrance to the bus. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with short dark hair and a way of holding herself upright that suggested someone accustomed to having people look at her and wait for information. As I was climbing the steps, she glanced at me briefly and asked, "What's your name?" "Brian," I said, slightly caught off guard. "Olivia." She nodded, as if it were simultaneously a greeting and a verification. "Please sit wherever you're comfortable." She did it with everyone, asked their name, gave hers, indicated free seats with a nod. No writing things down, no checking a list, just asked. I didn't know why, but there was something about it that made the bus feel less like a collection of strangers and something a little less anonymous. I sat by the window, not far from the middle. The bus slowly filled with people. Near the front, a young couple were talking in low voices with that particular tension of 2 people who are in the middle of an argument but know this isn't the right moment for it. I caught a fragment. "I told you the gaming pad is completely useless right now, and you just had to," and then the voices dropped to a whisper. Somewhere behind me, a woman with 2 small children was settling in with the tired calm of someone who is a parent and has learned not to panic in front of the children regardless of circumstances. The younger boy was sitting with his mother's phone, staring at the screen with total absorption, completely cut off from all the commotion around him, as if the world outside the window had nothing to do with someone who was watching a cartoon about talking animals. Next to him on the seat was a stuffed bear. On the other side of the aisle, 2 rows back, an elderly man with broad shoulders was holding a rosary. His lips moved soundlessly, saying something or counting I didn't know, but he was doing it with the same steady concentration as always, unhurried, as if what he had to say required no audience. Then I saw Anna. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of me by the window on the same side as me with her backpack on her lap and her gaze fixed somewhere outside. I recognized her immediately, despite the years. Anna had one of those faces you don't forget, and that way of sitting, slightly too straight, as if she was always ready to stand up and say something important. We knew each other from school. A long time ago, we were something like friends, not close ones, but the kind you could talk to, and it was fine. Then our paths drifted apart in the natural way of people who have no particular reason to stay in touch. And then there was Marta. For a fraction of a second, one specific memory surfaced. Anna in a courthouse corridor with the look of someone who has said what they came to say and is certain they were right to say it. She had looked through me then as if through a pane of glass, exactly the way she did now when she turned her head and our eyes met. Maybe a second passed. I watched something shift slightly in her face, barely perceptibly, the corners of her mouth, some tightening of the jaw. and then she turned her gaze back to the window with a precision that suggested I had never been there at all. I sat with that for a moment. I noticed I had straightened up in my seat. When I saw her, it simply happened automatically, as if my body had decided it needed to be in a better position in case of something my head hadn't yet defined. I observed this reflex with mild irritation at myself. I didn't know what else I felt. Actually, I did, I just wasn't sure exactly what it was. Something like irritation, maybe. Not anger. More that specific feeling when someone exists in your life as a problem you thought you dealt with long ago, and it turns out you hadn't dealt with it at all. You just put it somewhere out of reach and forgotten where. I looked for a moment at her back and the back of her head, and thought about how the universe has a truly unsubtle sense of humor. An apocalypse, a collection point, 37 buses, and the same one. I took her lead and looked away. Olivia cleared her throat when the driver closed the doors. "Right," she said, in the voice of someone accustomed to addressing groups without needing silence first. "For those who don't yet know, I'm Olivia. I'm a doctor, and I'm traveling with you to the facility at Leshna Gora. I know the situation there, and I'll be able to answer questions during the journey. I want you to know what's happening, because I believe you have a right to know." Several people turned towards her. The elderly man with the rosary didn't react at all. His lips kept moving in the same rhythm. "The virus has mutated," she said calmly. "What we've been observing over the past few months was one form of the illness. What we saw today is another. The new variant attacks differently, and some of those infected in the later stages show very severe aggression. This is not," she gave the words a slight emphasis, "this is not something we haven't seen before with other diseases. But the scale is new, and there are fatalities." At the word fatalities, she paused briefly, as if that word, spoken aloud for the first time in an enclosed space, needed a moment to settle. Then she walked the aisle between the seats, unhurried, and stopped beside the woman with the 2 small children. The younger boy had looked up from the phone at exactly that moment, with the unfocused expression of someone who has surfaced briefly from a cartoon and isn't yet sure whether to go back. The stuffed bear had slipped off the seat and landed on the floor between the seats. The boy watched it for a moment, as if he hadn't yet decided whether it was worth climbing off his mother's lap for something as unimportant as a plush toy. Olivia bent down, picked it up, and handed it to the boy. "I didn't lose him," she said. "He's here." The boy took the bear and pressed his face into its belly, and immediately the talking animals were back on the screen, and everything was fine again. The mother looked at Olivia with an expression that was too much to fit into one word. Olivia returned to the front. "The facility at Leshna Gora is a temporary shelter," she said. "It has medical support and is isolated from the city center. It's the best place we can be right now." A short pause. "I don't know what comes next. Nobody does. But we'll be safer there than here, and that's all I can say with certainty." Someone at the back of the bus asked something in a low voice. Olivia said she would answer specific questions once they were underway. And then through the window, I saw that something had changed. In the waiting area, on the side of the gates where people were still queuing for medical screening, a movement began that couldn't be mistaken for the normal restlessness of a crowd. Not panic yet, more like a wave, something that starts in one place and spreads outward. A few people began to shout. Someone fell, then someone else. Then there were gunshots. I didn't know how many. 2, maybe 3, maybe more. The sound was completely different from films, flatter and more muffled, and for a moment I wasn't even sure what it was. But the people in the bus knew. Several people jumped from their seats, someone screamed, the children started crying. The driver didn't hesitate for a second. The bus lurched forward. Not smoothly, not carefully. He simply floored it and went, and someone who had been standing by the doors outside must have leapt back because we nearly caught them pulling out. For a moment I could still hear shouting from outside, then it receded, and beyond the windows there was only the evening city and the flow of traffic. I pressed close to the glass. On the streets things were bad. Not everywhere. The main road we were on was held by police. We were driving down the middle on an almost empty lane. But to the sides, on the back streets and squares we passed, it was different. At the junction we passed halfway through the city, someone had put a window through at an electronics shop. It lay on the pavement in one piece, as if simply pushed out from inside. And several people were walking in and out with things in their hands, no hurry, as if it were a normal Saturday visit. Against the building wall opposite, a man sat with his elbow on his knee and his face in his hand, completely still amid all the movement. And I didn't know if he was sleeping or injured or had simply sat down and decided that all of this was pointless and here was where he would stay. On one of the side streets, just before we turned, I saw someone running fast, towards us, and then they suddenly stopped. Mid-stride, one leg slightly raised, and for a fraction of a second, it looked like a pause, like the moment when someone remembers they've left something behind. But they didn't turn back. They just stood and stared at a single point ahead of them. Around them, people were screaming and running. Someone passed within centimeters of them, and they didn't even flinch. They stood and stared. The bus turned and they disappeared from view, and I was left with that image, and I didn't know what to do with it. A little further on, a child, maybe 10 years old, maybe 12, was standing alone in the middle of the pavement, watching the bus go past with an expression that had no business being on a child's face. One car with a smashed windscreen sat sideways in the middle of the road and nobody moved it. A little further on, we passed a second evacuation bus heading in the same direction as us, and behind it a third, and somewhere behind them, barely visible through the rear window, another one. So many buses, so many people someone had gathered up and who were now traveling through the city as it burned. The elderly man who had been sitting with his rosary opened his eyes and looked out the window. His lips stopped moving. "Well," he said to no one in particular. "Here we go." Nobody answered. I sat with my backpack on my lap and watched the city fall behind us, and I thought about that pasta I'd left on the kitchen counter. 2 packets, because the third had accidentally made it into the bag. I never went back for it.